What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the third episode of the Hook Cam podcast. Today, we're going to be going over the Super Bowl, kind of my final thoughts on it, Chiefs game plan, which was really my biggest gripe with this Super Bowl, Tampa Bay's coaching in the Super Bowl, which I thought was outstanding, and then we'll talk a little bit about the parade. Brady and Gronk were getting after it today, and it was very enjoyable for me to watch. And then I have a couple other things I want to hit on. Russell Wilson appears to be very frustrated in Seattle, and I don't blame him. And then Orlando Brown wants out of Baltimore. So all of those things we'll get over. Let's dive into this with the first thing on our list, which is the Super Bowl. I see a lot of Chiefs fans who are angry at refs, right? Which is a very natural reaction to have when your team loses a Super Bowl. And of course, in this game, I do think that there were some ticky-tacky calls, right? Some calls. And what I mean by that is calls that you look at and you're like, I don't know if that was really a penalty. Could you really justify it? Especially given the circumstances, could you justify it? In my opinion, when you look at those plays, a lot of them, if you look at the definition of what the rule is, if you look at the definition of what defensive pass interference is, a lot of the flags that they were throwing, I think they had some legitimacy to them. And I understand the frustration, and it's natural to be angry at it. I'm a Patriots fan, so when I watched the Super Bowl in 2007, with that play with Eli, I look at it, I'm like, there's holding all over the place. And if you go back and look at it, there is holding all over the place. But refs didn't call it. They keep the flag in the pocket. Obviously, what happens. So, I think it's natural, for fans to have some gripes with the officials. Last year in the Super Bowl, the 49ers fans have a ton of issues with how the refs called that game. Officials are never going to call a great game. They're never going to call a right game. I can't stand officials personally, so I understand why Chiefs fans have that. All in all, though, I don't think that the blame for that loss should be on the officials. If you look anywhere, and you should place the blame anywhere for the loss in the Super Bowl for the Kansas City Chiefs, it's really tough to look anywhere else but coaching. It really is, in my opinion. When you look at what Tampa Bay was doing and how much space they were giving Chiefs receivers on the outsides, it still baffles me why they weren't taking advantage of that. And you could see plays where defensive backs were lining up, 8, 9, 10 yards off because they didn't want to get beat deep, and the Chiefs weren't taking advantage. They weren't running the stuff that they usually do. I mean, the Chiefs usually do such a good job of hammering their quick game, right? Hammering quick outs, hammering their speed outs, right? At 5 yards, 10 yards. They're telling me if Tyreek Hill with a defensive back who's 8, 9 yards off isn't going to be able to run a speed out, we're not going to be able to complete that ball. On top of that, when you look at the injuries that their offensive line had and how they had to deal with that going into this game, I mean, the first thing I'm doing if I'm an offensive coordinator with 4 to 5 offensive linemen out, clearly we have a disadvantage when it comes to pass rush and with our offensive line's abilities. I don't understand why they aren't going quick game immediately. That should be the first thing you're doing. Unless they just thought, and this is the only thing that makes sense, they just thought that their receivers were going to be able to beat Tampa Bay's defensive backs deep. They were going to be able to get balls behind coverage. I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense. That's the only thing that makes sense to me that they were thinking. That's it. And that clearly didn't happen. And you should be able to tell pretty early in that game, trying that deep ball, trying to drop back game, okay, we're not going to be able to complete this ball. And if you can't do that, you have to go to something else. And the Chiefs, to me, never went to anything else. They were seeing Pat run around back there. I mean, he ran for like a total of 500 yards in the backfield. That's insane, especially with his foot. I mean, he's getting surgery on his foot. Like, you have to find ways to help your guys out. That to me is the thing that should be being talked about in the Super Bowl, not necessarily the officials. And I understand, like I said, I understand. The officials, did they call their perfect game? No, not at all. But as a coach, you're never going to go into a game assuming officials are going to call a perfect game. You have to assume there's going to be missed calls. You have to assume there's going to be just horrible calls against your team. You have to. I always did. I always knew I was going to get a trash holding call on my offensive line or an absolute bullshit chop block call on my offensive line. It happened multiple times. So you have to anticipate stuff like that. And the biggest stat to me that sticks out is 3 for 13 on third down for the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm a big third down guy. If you can't convert on third down, your offense isn't going to be successful. And a matter of how you go about getting to third down, whether you want to get into manageable third downs, whether you have confidence in your drop back game, there's a bunch of different ways to go about it. But at the end of the day, if what you're doing isn't working, you have to try and find other things that are going to work against that defense. Tampa Bay consistently dropped into 3. They were in 1, but they would start off back and then they would roll forward, right? They would not press, but they would walk forward on the outsides to those receivers, forcing an outside release, forcing them to the sideline, use that sideline as a defender, and then they'd have safeties over the top. I mean, they did a great job of getting into zone coverages and, not necessarily, I would say confusing Patrick Mahomes, right? He's still a young buck. He's still got a lot to learn. They did a great job of confusing him, getting in his head. They had 3 safeties, right? They would, I've, film breakdowns of it where they got 3 safeties back there. They got 3 safeties back there. They're rolling 1. And it's tough to dissect as a quarterback. So I understand the problems that Mahomes was having, but from a Chiefs perspective, to me, the biggest thing with that game was the lack of coaching adjustments and the lack of really understanding what your team's capable of. Yeah, you were able to take the top off of teams earlier in the season, but you also had the protection. You also had the Kelechi Osmele's. You had the Eric Fishers. You had the Schwartz. I can't remember his first name. I wanted to call him Matt Schwartz, but I don't think that's it. Mitchell Schwartz. Jesus, can't figure it out. So that was the biggest thing with the Chiefs in that game, in my opinion. Now, looking at the other side of the ball, you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Their best thing was their coaching. That was their best attribute in this game, right? You look at the first 2 drives in that game, and it looked like they wanted to have 12 get into a rhythm. They wanted to have Brady get into a rhythm. Well, and by get into a rhythm, I mean throw the ball early, right? Get yourselves into a manageable third down, manageable second down, and that wasn't working. So what Tampa Bay did is they switched up their game plan, right? They went from being more of a pass-heavy approach to, hey, you know what? Let's screw this. Let's bring a 6 offensive linemen in and let's hammer the rock. And that's something that I'm going to do video on is Tampa Bay's ability to run the football. They brought in a 6 offensive linemen. And again, Spagnuolo didn't really change his defense, right? The Bucs were able to catch the Chiefs multiple times when they had their 6 offensive linemen in like their nickel package, right? And you can't do that when you have a 6 offensive lineman in the game. You have to have guys upstairs who are looking down on the field saying, hey, they got a 6 offensive lineman in. We need to put in our 5-man under. We need to put in our base. And they didn't do that. And Tampa Bay's coaching really shone through for me, specifically Todd Bowles and Byron Leftwich. Byron Leftwich called an outstanding game. Outstanding game for a young offensive coordinator. Very, very impressive on his behalf. I mean, Tampa Bay really didn't have a 3rd and long all night. All night. It was 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6. Manageable downs for Brady, especially when you have those weapons on the outside. On the other side of that, on the other side of the ball, Todd Bowles, again, outstanding game plan from him. I mean, these are 2 guys who really put on a show in the Super Bowl against a very, very good Kansas City Chiefs team, against a banged up team, but a good Kansas City Chiefs team. And they did outstanding. I want to give them credit because I don't know if everybody else is talking about it. I think, a lot of the shine should be on Bruce Arians. Absolutely. But those 2 coordinators did an outstanding job in that game. And that needs to be stated. Todd Bowles, he had his rough go of things as a head coach, but that game, on Sunday night, that was an absolutely massive statement from him. And from Byron Leftwich, a young offensive coordinator, a massive statement from him as well. I mean, like I said, bringing in 6 offensive linemen. They kept going with 11 personnel, right? One tight end, 1 running back. For those of you who don't know, that means you got 3 receivers out there. Well, 3 receivers for the Bucs is going to be AB, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin. That's a scary trio of receivers. And they really kind of had the Chiefs over a barrel, right? You have to come out to your nickel defense with that. Well, in response to that, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers just hammered the football a lot of times when they would go with their three receivers. And like I said, that was the easiest Super Bowl I've ever seen Tom Brady win, ever in my life. Like there was 0 problems with that. He was on the money, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers don't look like they're going anywhere, by the way. I don't know how much of that team's coming back or what the contracts look like as far as negotiations go, but I mean, that team is an absolute wagon. That defense is insane. I mean, dude, Levante David, Devon White, those 2 guys are, you want to talk about like the next, and it's not really the next thing because it's kind of here now, but that linebacker that can cover sideline to sideline, who could fill gaps, that is the truly prototypical linebacker in my eyes. Devon White is an absolute freak of nature, man. I've been watching that kid since he was at LSU. The kid is an absolute stud. He's fast as shit. He moves sideline to sideline incredibly well. He can cover every gap you need him to. He can hit like a train. I mean, the dude's got no problem tackling. The kid's an absolute freak. And then on the other side of him, you got Lavonte David, who's another freak of nature. I mean, Lavonte David in a lot of times was covering Travis Kelce and locking Travis Kelce down, which we have never seen before. I mean, an impressive showing from Lavonte David. So, and then on top of that, you look at their defensive line too, right? Vita Vea, Jackson made a video on him and he nailed it. Absolutely nailed it. Vita Vea was a centerpiece for that team. Another Bay Area kid, by the way, Milpitas kid. I'm happy to see my Bay Cats do well. Him and Tommy had a really cool moment after the game. Brady was like, he drank the same water I did. And it's cool to see that, right? And you can see that leadership with Brady and just, everybody who has played with him says that he forms these relationships with players. And that to me speaks volumes. And kind of diving into the Tom Brady GOAT situation, that topic. I mean, there really is no discussion at this point. There is no conversation. Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback to ever pick up a football. He's the greatest quarterback to ever step on a field. I mean, the dude is just a champion in every sense of the word. And, my dad and I talk a lot about, just the different tiers of athletes, right? We talk about a lot with MMA, how there's your bottom tier, your middle tier, your top of the middle tier, and then your elite tier, right? And there's really only a few athletes ever who have breached that elite tier. And what it takes to get there, in my opinion, is you have to be a champion. You have to be a competitor in every sense of the word. It's not just a champion. It's not just a competitor when you decide to, when you're going into the stadium, when you're getting ready for practice. Everybody does that in the NFL. Everybody prepares like an absolute savage in the NFL. It's your job. You're getting paid millions of dollars. Those guys take it seriously. But guys like Brady, guys like Kobe, guys like Michael Jordan, those guys that come to mind, Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, Sidney Crosby, you think about guys like that, those guys are champions in every facet of their life. It doesn't matter if it's regular season, off season, nutrition, sleep, it doesn't matter. Everything they do is towards one goal, and that's to winning and to winning championships. How can I make myself better? You see Brady and he's taking these trips to Montana. He's taking these trips to LA. He's throwing with guys all the time. That dude doesn't, obviously today it was buckled at the parade, which we'll get into because I love that. But that dude is a champion in every facet of the word. Nutrition, sleep, preparation, everything that dude does. It's all focused on one thing. It's that laser focus that he has, that ability to lock in on one goal, winning the Super Bowl, hoisting the Lombardi. How do I get this team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a team that he hasn't played on, right, to get to a Super Bowl? And he did that this year. There were times this year when the Bucs did not look like a Super Bowl winning team, losing to the Bears. That's the one that comes to mind. I know that they lost a couple other games, losing to the Saints twice. And it's not like Brady had an easy path. It's not like the Bucs had an easy path to the Super Bowl this year. They had to go through Drew Brees, and then they had to go through Aaron Rodgers. I mean, they had to play a wild card game against Washington, and Washington's not a bad team. It's not exactly like they're going to make a run, but they're not a bad team. But it's just that preparation, man. And people talk about, this greatest of all time stuff, and it becomes, clickbait almost, right? With Bleacher Report and ESPN and Pro Football, they put the GOAT emoji, all that stuff, and it's cool and shit. I get it, but I mean, when we're talking about serious championship effort, championship drive, championship preparation, there's really only a handful of guys who have played professional sports who get to that level. And you can see it with everything they do. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about with Brady is just that dude is just a champion in every single sense of the word. And that's why he's won 7 Lombardis. I mean, that is insane. He's won more Lombardis than 18 combined teams in the NFL. More than half of the NFL, put all those teams together, he still has won more Super Bowls than them. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. And all of that leads me to the Super Bowl parade today. And I'm sure that we've seen it. And it was absolutely hysterical. Gronk shows up with a big 32-pack of Aquafina. It wasn't Aquafina, but it was water, right? And it's just hysterical, man. I love how much fun these guys have. Gronk's on a boat. He's dancing on the boat. Messing around with the Lombardi. Brady threw a Lombardi from one boat to another. I'm sure everybody's seen it at this point. Absolutely hysterical. And it's just so funny, man. He's walking out. I don't think I've ever seen, obviously you hear stories about Brady being able to just house beer, drink beer like it's his job. Another thing that the dude's just a champion and he drinks beer faster than anybody. But you see him walking out of the gate and he's like almost being escorted by whoever that was. I don't know who it was, probably one of his boys, but he's just buckled, absolutely waffled, hammered drunk, getting into the car. Tommy, you had a few too many. You're it's bad PR now. It's not bad PR because it makes him more likable. And that's one of the things that I think is interesting about him going to Tampa is in a way it's made him a lot more likable to people, which is cool. I'm a Brady fan. I went to the same high school as him. I've heard nothing but great stories about Brady. I've heard he's always donating money. They wanted to name the field Tom Brady Field, and he was like, "No, I want to name it Brady Family Stadium." After his family. Just cool stuff like that you hear about Brady. Very giving, very gracious person, which is so contrary. And the media narrative has changed with Brady. It used to be, at least I felt like when he was in New England, almost hateful, almost spiteful, right? How they keep winning. We hate it. We hate it. We hate it. Goes to a new team, keeps winning. Everybody loves it now. I just think it's interesting. So, but Brady throwing the Lombardi, I mean, absolutely hysterical. I can't believe he threw it. And like when you see the setup, he's got the Lombardi and he's like kind of swinging it back and forth. And then the boat like speeds up that he's throwing it to. And everybody on the boat behind him was like, there's no way he's going to throw it. And then this dude just launches it onto the boat. Someone's over there. They'll catch it. There's 6 people over there. We'll figure it out. Got 6 or more of them. So who cares if it goes down? Just hysterical. Good to see the Tampa Bay, but those guys having fun, man. That team is a fun team. It really is. It's a fun team to watch. It's got a lot of characters on it, and it's, but that mindset of taking less is infectious. You already see Mike Evans saying, "Hey, I'm going to take less to keep these guys together." And it's something that really interesting that I heard on a podcast. It was on Spit and Chicklets. They're a hockey podcast, and Sidney Crosby, or no, it wasn't Sidney Crosby. It was one of the Bruins guys was talking about, taking less only works if everybody does it. And that's one of the really interesting things about that Brady effect, right? They get a taste of that winning, right? You get a taste of hoisting Lombardi, the confetti, the family, the pictures, everything. And then that disease starts to grow. And the disease I'm talking about is in a good way. And everybody's like, man, I want to do this again. And it only works. It only works if everybody does it. And you already see a guy like Mike Evans doing it. And it's tough to do in football. And hockey guys are different. And hockey kids are different. But in football, you got the popularity of Instagram. You got these kids who are getting recruited now out of high school. They got 50, 60,000 followers, as soon as they announce where they're going to commit, even before that, because they're in the public eye. You don't have stuff like that in football. That's why it's so special to see, that Brady effect in Tampa after it was in New England, right? How many years in New England did they have guys take cheap contracts? Amendola was talking about it. Edelman's taking cheap contracts. It's always about the team, and that's a very, very difficult thing to attain. It's simple to understand, right? You can only win when you got the right guys in the building, and the right guys have to be willing to take those pay cuts if you want to win. If you want to go get paid, that's fine. I got no problem with guys going and getting paid, but having one person take less doesn't make a difference. But having the entire team understand that it takes everybody taking less in order to keep that talent together and win championships, that's hard to do. That's hard to accomplish. And it's really hard to accomplish when you haven't established that winning pedigree. But when you got a guy like Brady who has that pedigree, it makes a little bit more sense. And when you've seen him do it for years and years and years, and like I said, he has that pedigree, makes a lot more sense to do. So that's kind of the bulk of what I wanted to talk about today. The other thing that, Russell Wilson has made it very clear that he's frustrated with the Seattle Seahawks front office. And there's really only 2 organizations in the NFL that I have a problem with how they run their team, right? And most other ones, I can understand how they run it. I can understand the moves that they make. But the Seahawks and the Packers are 2 teams that I just do not understand why they do what they do. The Seattle Seahawks have an almost generational talent at quarterback with Russell Wilson. And I say almost generational because he hasn't quite put himself into that generational talent. I think he's pretty close. In fact, I wouldn't mind saying that because the dude does a ton for Seattle. But my biggest problem with the Seattle front office is that they almost refuse to get this dude help. And I'm not talking about on the outsides. I'm not talking about at the skill positions. I'm talking about the front 5. I mean, besides who really have the Seahawks had as their offensive lineman who you look at and go, damn, that dude's a stud. Besides Max Unger. Max Unger was an absolute freak, but he was there before Russell Wilson. Yeah, I mean, it was almost like the Seattle Seahawks front office saw what Russell Wilson could do his first couple of years, and they just crossed off offensive line off of their list of needs. We got 3 back there. He'll figure it out. That's not a winning formula. And they continuously go and they draft these defensive dudes in the first round. And it's like I get it. You're trying to build that defense. That's Pete Carroll's thing, right? He runs that 4-3, that super athletic 4-3. And they want to go get those dudes who can fill those spots. I get it. I understand it. That's how they won their first Super Bowl, is because their defense was freakishly good. And they just dropped into cover 3. But you have to get Russell Wilson help. I mean, literally, you are taking years off of this dude's career by neglecting to address the problem at the offensive line. And that's the thing, man. You have a talent like Russell Wilson. You've seen what he can do late in games. You've seen what he can do just regularly. I mean, the kid's an absolute freak of nature when it comes to playing football and playing quarterback for the Seahawks. But the neglect of the offensive line position will always hinder that team. And the fact that they don't understand that, hey, we should probably address this, frustrates me. It frustrates me as a fan. I'm like, dude, can we figure this out? Russell Wilson's an outstanding quarterback who should be a multiple-time Super Bowl winner. And it will not happen in Seattle unless they address the offensive line. It will not happen. They will always be that team that could make a run, quote unquote, but they'll never be that team that's a legitimate heavyweight in the NFC until they address the offensive line. It's too much. You can't put that much on a quarterback and expect him to go out and make chicken salad out of chicken shit. You just can't. You have to address the offensive line. Everything else is going to fall into place after that. And the Packers is the same thing, just at a different spot. It's at the skill position. I mean, it's like the Packers have Aaron Rodgers, and then they have Devontae Adams, and they crossed off everything else. We have a free quarterback and a stud number 1 receiver. We don't need to worry about it. They'll figure it out. That's not how you win in the NFL. Look at the teams who have won. Look at last year with the Chiefs, right? Mitchell Schwartz had an outstanding playoffs, one of the best playoffs ever from an offensive lineman. That offensive line was insane last year. That's the only reason why they beat the Niners. It's because that offensive line was so damn good. And the fact that teams don't acknowledge it, and the fact that teams try and compensate for talent at another position, right, for lack of talent at another position with superior talent at a different position, is just mind-blowing to me. I mean, Rodgers and the Packers this year specifically, the Seahawks, I've always kind of felt like, why aren't you addressing the offensive line? That's the only thing you need, right? Everything else you can figure out. Your defense is good enough to make a couple of stops a game. That offense is going to be freakishly good if you go get an insane tackle or an insane guard or just build up the interior. And that's why they lost to the Rams. But the Packers this year, I mean, it's like you have T. Higgins on the board. You have Chase Claypool on the board. There's another receiver on the board, too, that I'm blanking on right now. But it's like, dude, go get those guys. Help Aaron Rodgers out. I get that he's good enough where he can check things out the line, and guys in the NFL are good enough where they can probably get off coverage and you can win the regular season games and you can get into the playoffs. That's cool. I get it. But you have to help these guys out. Generational talents that you are missing out on. The window is closing. The window's closing on Russell Wilson. The window's closing on Aaron Rodgers. And the fact that those franchises won't go and help their guys out is mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing. I don't understand it. And it's like with the Packers this year, it's like, okay, if you don't want to address receiver, okay, maybe you can convince me that. But go get a linebacker. Help your defense out. Hold teams to 2 scores a game. Rodgers is going to figure out how to put up 21 or 17. But they didn't. They go and they draft a quarterback. It's just tough for me to wrap my head around. So that's my gripes with the Seahawks and the Packers. Last thing that I want to hit on this podcast, will be a shorter one, probably around 30 minutes. Orlando Brown wanting out of Baltimore. I don't know the reasons for it. Orlando Brown is a very, very good offensive tackle, though. He's a very good tackle for the Baltimore Ravens. And the fact that he wants to get traded is super interesting to me, because Baltimore is one of those places that Harbaugh really seems to have things going in the right direction. Like, you don't see a lot of guys getting bummed out or wanting to leave. It's weird to me that he wants to. And it makes me, kind of not question, but, I'm intrigued to think about what's going on in that locker room. So he's a tackle who could be on the radar for a lot of teams this year. You're going to have to give up a lot to get him, no doubt. but he's definitely a guy who's going to be on the radar, who obviously he wants out, and when you want out, you put your franchise kind of over the barrel. It's weird. The views of a lot of podcasters and sports figureheads in today, there's really two ways to look at a franchise. You're either for the owner or for the player. That's kind of how it boils down, but there's got to be a happy medium, and I'm interested to see why Orlando Brown wants out of Baltimore. But like I said, you put your franchise over a barrel now, because when you're trying to make a move for him or you're trying to get him out, okay, well, now everybody who's trying to make a move to get Orlando Brown knows he's not going to play for you. And that they're like, because of that, you don't have to give up as much, right? Okay, originally, if we thought he was going to play for you, we have to give up a lot, because if we don't, you're just going to keep him. But now it's like, all right, if Baltimore keeps Orlando Brown, what does that mean for Orlando Brown? Is he just going to not play? Just take a year off? It's kind of like the Deshaun Watson thing, and Eric made a really good video about the Deshaun Watson saga going on in Houston. And it's like, if you're that owner in Houston and Deshaun doesn't want to play or he doesn't want to get traded, then it's like, fine, we're not going to win even with you right now. We're in no position to make a run. I don't know. It's just an interesting way to take a look at that. So that's kind of all I got for you guys today. Shorter podcast, 26 minutes for me right now. I'll probably cut this thing down a little bit. Really cool fight card coming up this Saturday. Gilbert Burns and Kamaru Usman are getting after it. Two teammates. Kamaru Usman's been in Gilbert Burns' corner a couple of times. It'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. Not a whole lot else. Rugby, I'm getting into rugby. Six Nations is going on. Really cool stuff. But that's all I got for you guys today. I'll keep this one short. Hope everybody's having a good day. I'm going to be moving soon, so there might be a little bit of a lack of content. I'll try to keep up with my stuff, though. Keep pumping out content for you guys. Thank you for all the support. Once again, you guys are awesome. That's all I got for you today, though. Make sure to check out Jackson Kruger Sports. Max Keys, he's my music guy. Both of those guys are outstanding human beings. Also, the entire Detroit guys, the DSA. I know I didn't talk Detroit, but I love plugging those guys because they're just good people. So that's all I got for you guys today, man. Hope everybody's staying safe, washing those hands, and I'll see you next time.